So back at the beginning of 3.1, we had started talking about this kind of this spectrum of how we will classify or categorize our markets. And we talked about the number of firms being the key thing that we look to whenever we try to figure out how would we define this type of market. We said perfect competition is where we have lots and lots of firms, and we're going to look at the other three, and they actually kind of get grouped into this category known as imperfect competition, which makes sense if the other one is called perfect competition. The rest of these fall into imperfect. The first one we're going to talk about is something called monopolistic competition. So, monopolistic competition is actually something that you are fairly familiar with because a lot of firms that you're aware of, a lot of industries, are considered monopolistically competitive. This is when we see many firms selling differentiated products, which means they're selling similar goods, but they differentiate themselves, and a lot of the markets you know of are that way. The one that I like to think about most is like restaurants, right? Like you might have a restaurant where they all sell burgers, but they have to practice product differentiation because despite them all selling burgers, they're not identical burgers. They have to make their burgers stand out in some way. And so maybe it's that their burgers have special toppings or a secret sauce or whatever it might be, or that it's, the meat's never frozen or whatever it is. They have to make their product stand out. We see the same thing is true within like the car market. Depending on who you talk to, some people consider the car market to be monopolistically competitive. But the idea is all these different companies are selling cars, but they have to make their car stand out versus others. Maybe it's the features they offer. Maybe it's the colors or the design that they offer. All of those cars are getting you places, but they have to make their product stand out against the others. So we end up seeing that in monopolistic competition, there is lots of actual competing, whether it's through the quality of the product, it might be through the price of the product, like they compete based on their prices, or through marketing and advertising, where they try to show what kind of product they have, who's using their product, right? We talk about influencers on social media, right? That's what that is. But we see, just like perfect competition, monopolistically competitive markets, all the firms there also maximize their profit where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Now, like we said, within monopolistic competition, there still are a very large number of firms. Like if we think about restaurants, there's tons of restaurants, even just in Carmel, right? But what we end up seeing is that they have small market shares. So they represent a very small percentage of the market. And because they do, they really don't have a whole ton of influence over the market price. However, what we do see is they're able to kind of set their price because their product, they can say, is that you're purchasing based on the quality of the product or the type of product that you're buying, something that makes their product stand out against others. We also see freedom of entry and exit. Whenever there's a large number of firms and everyone has a smaller slice of the pie, it's easier for someone else to walk in and get a slice of that pie as well. And if somebody steps out of the market, we're not missing out on that much of the pie. But we also see that because everybody owns such a small percentage, we see that there's no collusion. And collusion is wherever businesses work together and they coordinate. And this is typically to coordinate in ways to take advantage of the market. But because everyone has such a small piece of the pie, we see that if a couple are working together, like a small piece of pie plus a small piece of pie is still a small piece of pie. And so we don't see that there's really any collusion that takes place in monopolistically competitive markets. First of all, because it's illegal, but second of all, because coordination is really tough and it's really ineffective when it comes down to it. So we talked about restaurants being an example. Another example is like clothing. You guys know that. Like there's tons of different clothing brands and they're all providing clothing, but they make their clothing stand out, whether it's through the colors or the fabric or the designs. And that's what they're trying to sell you. They have to differentiate themselves and then they have to compete with everyone else along the way.